Welcome to part two of the Eisenhower era. Now let's talk about the new economy. In the post-World War II era and into the 1950s, the United States is going to go through an economic boom. This economic boom was driven by several things. First of all, there was the increase in defensive spending that was prompted by the growing Cold War. You had expanded foreign aid, economic aid to foreign countries like the Marshall Plan and other things that will follow. And many of the shortages during World War II led to a surplus of disposable capital by consumers. So once civilian production resumed, you had people that actually had some disposable income ready to spend on these new projects. And you got a whole series of new industries that are going to come out. You're going to have advances in industries in electronics and chemicals and plastics, aviation, right? The jet age is going to hit the aviation industry, and a new field called computers, right? In 1946, two engineers at the University of Pennsylvania, J. Presper Eckert and John Williams Mauchly, are going to complete the first fully digital computer. It was called ENIAC, right, which stood for Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. Okay, it will be succeeded by a computer called UNIVAC-1, or Universal Automated Computer. This computer, that's the picture you see right here. As you can see, it's very compact, right? This computer was used to tabulate the census data in 1951, and also it was used to calculate the election returns in 1952, right? So here's your first opportunity for the Russians to fix the elections, right? By 1958, the United States is producing $1 billion of computers per year, and the GNP in the 1950s is growing at 3.2% per year. These are pretty large numbers, right? The service industry are going to have large increases in jobs, right? You're going to see growth in restaurants, hotels, repair shops, hospitals, universities. Unemployment is going to average just 4.5% for the entire decade, and in 1953 it was only 2.9%. Right? At the same time, you're going to have really low inflation, only about 2% per year. If you were living in the 1950s, you could pretty much count on, if you had a fair to middle-end job, of a 40-hour work week, 2 to 3 weeks of paid vacation per year, and the possibility of retiring at the age of 65 with a pension, and then, of course, on top of that, Social Security. With this increased prosperity of the 1950s, a lot of people began to move out of the urban cities and into the suburbs. It used to be the suburbs were pretty much reserved for the upper class and the upper middle class, but with more efficient construction methods, cheap land because of a lot of farmland being reclaimed because of efficiencies in the farming industry, and federal aid, you're going to start to see more just regular middle class people move out of there. There's an exodus from the cities, if you will. William J. Levitt is going to turn this into a cottage industry, if you'll excuse the pun. Levitt believed that he could make housing more affordable by building housing developments on the model like what Henry Ford did with automobiles. How do I turn this into an assembly line, right? A mass production situation. He would build simple houses that came with prefabricated parts. They had no basements, right, and built on this cheap farmland he was buying up. His first attempt was in 1947 on Long Island. He bought up a 1,000-acre lot of former farmland and started building houses on it, right? He'll call the place Levittown. Levittown is going to sell houses at $7,990 per house, right? That's ideal for a young couple just starting out. The project is going to be a huge success. He's going to contract in 1949 1,400 houses in this Levittown in just a single day. By the time this first building project is done, he's built 17,500 houses on a site that houses around 82,000 people. And of course, there's land set aside also for schools and infrastructure and everything else. He's literally built a town. Okay, he's going to repeat this elsewhere. There's going to be a Levittown, Pennsylvania. There's a Levittown, Puerto Rico. He's also going to build portions of Williamsboro, New Jersey, and he's even going to be involved in developments, some suburban developments in France, right? Um, Between Levitt and others that are going to follow his lead, you're going to have a massive amount of suburbanization. Matter of fact, a lot of Americans, the bulk of Americans today, live in some suburb. How many of you, for example, live in Fort Worth or in Dallas, right? By 1960, 30.5% of Americans lived in the suburbs. That was about 55 million out of a population of 180 million, right? Individual home ownership was up 20%, right? Of course, with that, with this increased suburbanization, came also a need for these people to now commute to get to their jobs. Well, having Eisenhower as president was ideal if you're looking at transportation issues. Eisenhower has some history with this. In 1919, as a young lieutenant in the United States Army, he was involved in the Army's first transcontinental convoy. It was an attempt to move an entire division from New York City to San Francisco using the Lincoln Highway, the only highway that connected both coasts of the nation. But when we say highway, this is a little bit misleading. These aren't paved roads everywhere. In matter of fact, in a lot of places. In a lot of places, there are dirt trails and almost deer trails for that matter. The attempt was a disaster, right? This first attempt in 1919. And then on top of that, when Eisenhower is in Germany, he sees the Autobahn that was developed by the Nazis. So he's got some background with this. He sees it from a position of strategic defense, right? But ultimately, this can benefit everyone. In a message to Congress in 1955, he's going to declare that the American highway system is dangerous, costly, and inadequate. And so he called for a public enterprise to be shared by the federal government and the states to create a national road system for transportation and defense. The result of this is in June of 1956, Congress is going to pass the Federal Highway Act. This is going to become the largest peacetime government project in history up to that time. It's going to cost $114 billion and lay down 46,000 miles of highway across the United States. The longest stretch it'll lay down is Interstate 90, which stretches from Boston, Massachusetts to Seattle, Washington. But any place where you go now, where you see the little blue signs, the interstate highways, that was either created by or was generated from the Federal Highway Act and Eisenhower's idea on creating a interstate system in this nation, right? So if it wasn't for Eisenhower, we wouldn't have a place to store all our orange barrels. Just like the economic boom after World War I, the economic boom after World War II is going to lead to a lot of consumerism. Even more so this time, though, because we are going to have a larger and more firmly established middle class and people with a lot more disposable income. And even if you can't afford to buy what you want at the time, just like in the Roaring '20s, you could always buy it on credit. Only now, manufacturers and companies are going to take it to the next level. You're going to see the introduction of the credit card, right? In 1950, Diners Club is going to issue the first ever credit card to New Yorkers, right? It'll expand out from there. By 1960, Sears Roebuck will have a credit card that is going to issue out $10 million of consumer debt. In 1945, Americans only had about $5.7 billion of consumer debt, most of it locked up in assets like cars and houses. By 1960, it had $56.1 billion, right? Everything began geared more towards convenience. In 1956, E.J. Corvettes is going to create the first ever shopping mall in Southdale, Minnesota, right? Shopping malls, of course, are going to proliferate across the nation. Do they still exist today? Well, I mean, some argue that they're dying. I would make the argument that they're moving. The shopping mall today is Amazon and the other online outlets. It's all about convenience, right? And that's still true. In San Bernardino, a fast food restaurant called McDonald's is going to open in 1948. Ray Kroc will take the restaurant over in the mid-1950s and make it now a global food chain. Fast food, the food you eat there really quick. You start seeing the proliferation of things like ready-to-heat meals, TV dinners, which brings up another topic, televisions. Televisions are going to become very, very popular. In 1941, there was only 2 television stations in total. By 1960, there were 579. In 1949, consumers were buying 250,000 televisions each month. So now we've developed this new persona. We have our television in front of us. We have our TV tray, which gets invented, our TV dinner, which gets invented. And so now we get home, we sit down, we eat our dinner, watch our TV, and ignore the rest of our family. Something we still do to this day. We are very, very addicted to this type of technology. Matter of fact, in this room where I'm doing this recording right now, I've got the computer right here that's got the camera in front of me. I've got this computer, which projects my notes with the numbers and stuff like that, which is projected on a screen, which is above the computer right here. And then I have another TV right here that's hooked to the PlayStation where I can watch the news. And then, of course, we all have these, right? So in this room alone, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 items. I only have 2 eyeballs. That means I have to have one eye looking at 3 things at any one time. Or I got to bring in here 2 of my cats.